be starting up the class here. So hopefully we get some people gathering around. All right. Should have made the announcement a few minutes ago, but yeah. All right. So who all? All right. Do we have anyone else that wants to attend the class? Yes. Well, that's not already over here. Attend the class. You're gonna listen. I'm gonna listen. All right. I'm not sure if my voice will carry well enough.
No yelling. How about that? Finally official.
Finally official. I've got the boots. All right, guys in chat. You guys ready for some class? There's not going to be a whole lot of demonstration today. Maybe we can get someone on it a little bit. But anyways, so the class today we're going to be talking about the foundation of the skills that you're going to need. So this is what your fundamentals are built on. So oftentimes you hear people talk about working on your fundamentals. Things like whip punishing, movement, and stuff like that. Well, this is what you need to work on in order to be able to work on your fundamentals. I talked a little bit about this in one of the other tutorial streams, but I figured I would condense it down a bit and talk about it here. So anyways, there's basically three. I called them the pillars in the previous one, but I like the foundation a bit better for the name. So I've got three things in the foundation. You've got your execution, you've got your knowledge, and you've got your decision making. So like execution covers things like being able to get your character to do what you want, being able to do movement, backdash, canceling, combos, sidestepping, basically anything where you tell your character what to do. But also, like execution can really come into play when you're dealing with clutch situations, because if you've trained up your execution, that means when you're under pressure and you really need it to come out, that's when you find out if you've got it practiced. So knowledge covers everything that's all the knowledge you need, like what's punishable, how to get out of certain situations, knowing situations you can pressure your opponent with, knowing your character's weaknesses and their strengths, or knowing each character's weaknesses and strengths, knowing other players' weaknesses and strengths. You guys able to hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Alright, but yeah, knowing the character's strengths and weaknesses, and knowing the player's strengths and weaknesses. There are sometimes where a player will have a weakness that you can exploit. A good example of this is my match versus Run It Black at SCR. Couldn't break throws, and I exploited that. And also knowing what options are available, because there's tons of options available in Tekken. But depending on the situation, certain options are available to you and other options just might be a bad idea. So we also have the decision making and reactions. I lumped reactions in with decision making because you have to be able to make your decisions very fast. If you're not making your decisions very fast, then it makes it really makes your decision too late to be of use. So with the decision making, you need to be able to use your knowledge and your execution in a timely manner. So you're going to need to use the other foundations for this. Reactions are really important to the process. Like I said, if you don't make your decision in time, like if you block a minus 12 frame move and you decide on the 13th frame to punish it, well, you're too late. So part of your decision-making process is learning to make on-time decisions. But yeah, so to give an idea, it takes about 20 frames to react to an input. So anything that's 20 frames or slower is generally reactable. Anything that's less than 20 frames is generally unreactable. But really good players can react to things as fast as 15 frames. But that's really looking for a specific input. Also, keep in mind that the best decision for you might not be the optimal decision. Sometimes you'll say, people will tell you you're not doing the optimal stuff, but if the optimal thing is a 5 electric combo and you can't do a 5 electric combo, then it's not the best decision for you. So you have to make decisions based on what your skill level is and what you think. And also, you might not be able to. In some situations, you might not be able to decide until later what would have been optimal, like in the wall carry situation where you're not quite sure where the wall is. So the goal is to strive for the optimal, but if you're not optimal, don't beat yourself up over it. Just learn and do better next time. Other things that your decision making will be used for is determining whether or not to go for max damage or positioning. There are times where you can get more damage but lose positioning. Like for example, if you've got an option between two different punishers, one's more damage but the other one's more plus frames, sometimes you might want the more plus frames. Or if you can spike the opponent into a hard knockdown situation but lose some damage. That's part of the decision-making process. Also, when you're evaluating your decision-making process, just because you got hit by something doesn't mean that you made a bad decision. Because like you might be making a decision that covers multiple other options. Like if you sidestep left versus Mishima's, for instance, that covers a lot of options. But occasionally you can get hit by it, by sidestepping left. It doesn't necessarily mean you made a bad decision. It just means your opponent made the decision that would hit you for a decision that you made. But hey, Motivation and Kelly Piggy. Yeah, anyways. So you can't base your whether or not a decision was good or not based on whether or not you got hit. Other things that you want to do with your decision making is you want to simplify your decisions while maximizing your opponents. By what I mean by this is you find situations where you have like two or three choices to make, but your opponent might have 7 or 8 choices that they think they have to make. You can oftentimes see this in with heavy plus frame situations, like after Dragunov's back 1+2 that hammer, it's like plus a bunch, and wake up situations where the opponent has like 20 different ways to get up, but you might be able to have options that will hit almost all of them. But yeah, so if you minimize what you have to think about but maximize what your opponent has to think about, you can make it so that your opponent will crack more. And that's really important in high-level play, because if you can make your opponent crack, that means you've got a hole in their armor. Yeah, so those are the foundations and what they're used for. We also would like to know how to improve your foundations, because it's how you get better. If you don't have your foundations in place, then if you're lacking in one aspect, then your whole game will suffer. So the important thing is when you're working on your foundations or your skills, work on one skill at a time. Because if you try to work on them all at the same time, you're not gonna see any improvement, or it'll take a long time to see improvement. So, work on your execution. Go to practice mode. Work on your execution. Steve, you have a question? The first thing that you should work on is execution, because that will be you'll see the most you'll well, foundations are kind of like the underlying skills that that you use. Like the term skill here can mean anything that you're working on. So it could be a so you're asking about the focusing on one skill at a time. And it paid off. Yeah. Yeah, but the reason why you want to limit what you're working on at a time is because if you are working on like 10 things at the same time, you're diffusing your effort, and since it takes repetition to build the skill, you can repeat one skill a bunch in a shorter amount of time than you can repeat the 10 skills the same number of times. And it just tends to be more efficient if you work on one thing at a time. Right. I mean, and obviously you're not going to work on backdash canceling for an entire year before moving on to the next thing. You work on it for a while until you feel like you've improved, and then you can work on something else. All right. And poking is really important, but we will not cover that this week. But yeah, so one thing you might notice is that while working on that one skill, the rest of your gameplay might suffer, and that's okay. It's because you're working on something new, you're not familiar with it, and you're not concentrating on the rest of your gameplay. So it's okay if the rest of your game suffers. Don't worry about winning. Well, actually, reframe what you think of as a win. A win. Don't think of a win as beating your opponent. Think of a win as trying to use the skill you're working on as much as possible. And if you successfully use the skill and get better at using the skill, then consider that a win, even if your opponent won the match. You're not playing against the opponent, you're playing against yourself at this point. And that can be very difficult to do, to reframe your mind for that, because we're trained to want to win. So to work on execution, you're going to need to do a lot of repetition. It's repetition, repetition, repetition. You start in practice mode by practicing your execution, whether it's like basic execution like backdashing, forward dashing, sidestepping, pokes, combos. Get a feel for it in practice mode where there's no pressure at all. After you start getting it down in practice mode, go to treasure battle. Practice it against the computer. There's very little pressure, but it's against an opponent that doesn't just stand there. It's not just a training dummy. Will actually hit you back. But there's also very little pressure there. But that way you can start building your skill slowly. After you get comfortable doing it in treasure battle, start doing it against other people. Yeah, so like an example for if you wanted to learn how to whip punish, you recommend knowing how to backdash cancel first, but in practice mode, set the opponent to repeat in action. Choose a big move that doesn't move them forward too much. And it takes a lot of time to recover. Set the timing to slow, and then practice just moving out of that range of that move, and when they whip, you punish them. Once you start getting that down, change the timing to a random timing so you don't know exactly when it'll come out. That way you get practice building your reactions. Once you're comfortable with that, you might add a few additional moves that recover quicker, like a down forward one or a jab. And there you try to practice punishing the big move but not the small moves. Once you're comfortable with that, you can take this to treasure battle and just backdash against the CPU until they whiff, and then whiff punish them. And don't care if you lose the match. You're just practicing the whiff punishing. And once you're comfortable with that, then you go up against other players. And just practice doing it. Try to make them whiff with movement and quick pokes. And then once you feel fairly comfortable with your whiff punishing, try to just incorporate it back into your overall game plan. Because at this point, the rest of your game plan might have been suffering some, and you need to figure out where it fits in the rest of what you're doing. And once you've successfully gotten it integrated back in, then start working on a new skill. Pick up something else and move on. Alright, to improve your knowledge, this one's kind of nice because you can do it anywhere, because you can read. There's a lot of information out there. You can read frame data, read articles, whatever. You can watch tutorials, watch videos, watch players to see what they do. Yeah, there's all sorts of resources to improve your knowledge. One important thing, though, is to ask questions. I know a lot of people don't like asking questions, and I know in some places, the better players like to hide information for some reason. But just ask questions. Be unabashed about asking questions. And you either get answers or not. If you don't get answers, then you got to learn how to test stuff. And so that's another use for practice mode, is to test out the question, like how much is that on block? You can go to practice mode and find that out. I might cover that in more detail in another lesson, but I'm trying to keep these short. But yeah, so if you don't know how to test things in practice mode, ask someone, or wait for me to cover it in another tutorial. Yeah, so then probably the hardest foundation skill that you can takes to improve is your decision making. Just because you can't actually improve this in practice mode. Because it's really, you have to decide specifically against the player you're playing against. But it does utilize both execution and knowledge. Your execution and knowledge at the same time. And so by improving both your execution and your knowledge, you can help improve your decision making. But also, another part of improving your decision making is just don't be afraid to experiment and fail. Like, if you get hit by something a million times and you don't know, and you're like, I don't know how to deal with that, well, whatever you're doing isn't working. So try doing other stuff. Like, try doing something maybe off the wall. Try doing something completely stupid. Yeah, and just keep trying stuff until you figure out what the best situation to do is. Sometimes your only choice is to just block something. Like if someone's got a heavy frame trap where they're like +8 and then they got a magic 4 afterwards, you just got to block that, or maybe you can duck it, But unless you experiment with it, and you can like casuals are the perfect time to experiment with that sort of stuff, because it doesn't matter if you win or lose. But experiment, try stuff out, do something stupid, and learn. Yeah, but so also, if you find you don't have the knowledge or the execution to make proper decisions, go back and work on your execution, read up on your knowledge, test things out, and also experiment. So it's important to be able to realize when you don't know how to make a good decision, and then go back and figure out the correct decisions for that. You do that by going into practice mode and testing things. So I talked a bit about this so the things that you're trying to do in your decision-making process, you want to minimize the things you have to actively think about. Since in decision-making, you've got to be quick about your decisions. If you have to think about what the next hit in the combo is, you're going to drop the combo. If you have to think about what your punisher is, you're not going to get the punisher out in time. So you have to be able to practice your execution and your practice your execution and your knowledge enough so that you can call up what you need to, instinctually. You see a -12 move, you've got your 12 frame punisher on lock, and you can just whip it out. Because the more things you have to think about, the slower your reactions are going to be. Yep.
It's less thinking I'm going to do this move and that's more
Yeah. You want certain things to be instinctual, like throw breaking, blocking slow lows, punishment, whiff punishing. You want all that to be like basically instinctual. You want to practice it so much that it's become instinct. Because you're going to need to spend your active thought processes on things like, what am I getting hit with? What is the opponent doing? What are their habits? Things that you can't do instinctually. Things that you're going to have to recognize, process, and then figure out what the best way of dealing with that is. Because that's where a lot of the game will end up being at a high level. Is that everything else is instinctual. It's the players figuring out each other and trying to beat them out, figuring out how to get through their defenses. So other things that will help your decision-making process is knowing what your options are for different scenarios. So this is where knowing matchups is really helpful, is that way you know what you can do against your opponent. You don't need to think about it in the match, you just know it. You can also use some downtime in either in between rounds or during long animations to sit back, organize your thoughts, try to figure out what was going on. It gives you a little bit of a chance to breathe and think about the things you hadn't had time for. So that's so those will all help your decision-making process. So that about covers everything I wanted to talk about today. Were there any additional questions? Is there anything anyone wanted to add? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's true. That's repetition and practice, and learning how to block slow lows and breaking throws and things like that will be another topic at some point, because that is something that trips up a lot of players. But with the decision-making process, if you're thinking about too many things, then it makes it harder to see the slow lows and the throws and react appropriately. So that's why you want to streamline your thought process while you're in the game. All right. So anyways, I think that should about wrap it up for today on the lesson. I haven't decided what I'm going to talk about.